بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأزواجه وذريته وأصحابه ومن والاه وبعد فالحمد لله ثم الحمد لله. Alhamdulillah, much was recited tonight about Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam. And there's a lot of parallels from the life of Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam and any other group of believers after a time has passed when people start to no longer recognize what their fitrah is and what they've actually been created for, which is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what happens is when a prophet then is sent after some time, people deem what they're saying to be strange. Or after a long time has passed since the prophet has been sent, people tend to now veer away from the teachings of prophethood. So when Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam was sent to the people, it was during a time of corruption after they had deviated from their original purpose of life. And we know the famous story that Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam was created, or rather commanded to build an ark, to build a ship. And it's funny when you look at different societies and civilizations, they have similar stories about building a ship and a flood being a source of their doom. And the person who built the ship in advance was able to save the people who believed in him. So most famously, there's a story of Gilgamesh. And people now actually say, who are critical of religion, they say that the story of Noah was actually a fabrication and just copied the story of Gilgamesh. And these are like objections that people make now, and they look at this as being mythology because these stories existed in other cultures. And I remember speaking once at a multi-faith event, and one of the attendees came up to me after, because I think I had made mention of prophets like the prophet Noah, and he asked me, so I'm a Christian, but we believe that the story of Noah was just allegorical. It's just symbolic because we know that it's not really true, because there were other stories like Gilgamesh, and the Bible just copied off of it. So the problem here is that there's an assumption that the story of Gilgamesh preceded the story of Noah. And this is the thing that I asked the person. I was like, well, we don't believe that because we don't necessarily believe that his story came before Noah. Just because the Bible came after that story, the story speaks about the Prophet Nuh alayhi salam. So it doesn't mean that the story of Noah came at the time of the Bible. It was obviously much before that. And then they had the added problem of dating their book. So they trace back the time of Noah only like, who knows, a few hundred years, a few centuries. That's another problem because then they can say that the story of Gilgamesh came before the story of Noah. But we don't have that problem either. If anything, then what I said to him was that can actually probably establish the fact that the story of Noah happened. Because it happened, it actually existed in other cultures. So the other cultures were aware that a flood had happened. And with the passing of time, things do get distorted. So the fact that they actually mentioned the story alludes to the fact that it may have actually happened. Now, if details change, that happens over time, and people's sources become messed up. Things get there becomes a dramatization of stories, and things can change. But we don't have that issue because we don't date it first and foremost. So we don't believe it to be allegorical, but we actually believe that it happened, and that a flood came, right? And this is some of the things that modernists try to attack some of our youngsters in universities with. Like they try to make us feel embarrassed about believing in things. Like this is old-fashioned. Do you really actually believe in that? Oh, really? Oh, we thought that now that you're educated and you're grown up, like people don't really believe in that anymore. But this is something that we absolutely and most certainly believe in. And that's why even in the story of Nuh alayhi salam, it's a common example of what believers have to go through. So while he's building the ship, what happens? They make fun of him. They start mocking him, right? And then so you're making a boat in the middle of the desert. You really want to make a boat in the middle of the desert? And he says, yes, a flood is coming. A flood is coming. And they start mocking him because there's going to be a flood here in the middle of the desert where we don't even get enough rain to like satiate our thirst. And they start mocking him. So Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam tells them what? In taskharu minni or minna, فَنَحْنُ نَسْخَرُ مِنْكُمْ كَمَا تَسْخَرُونَ. So if you're going to make fun of us, well, we're going to make fun of you just like you're making fun of us. The tables will turn. And if you don't accept this and you want to continue to mock us, then we're going to have the last laugh. And we're not going to be deterred by the things that you say, because we have something to actually found our belief in, that this is something which is a truth. This is a haqq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's truth from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the same thing that we see now. If you try to be religious and you try to do the right thing, or you try to say like we should pray, you try to say that we should believe in God and there's a hereafter, and you should be conscious of this God, and you should do good deeds because you want to go to heaven and you don't want to go to hellfire, people look at you a little sideways and they start to think that you really still believe in all of that. These are things that maybe you learn growing up, but there's not a real conviction in it. So we have to remember that this is not something new, that people have always mocked people of truth, especially the farther away they get from their fitrah and the farther they get away from the teachings of their prophet, because the material world and the secular world starts to have a dominant effect on them, right? So the Prophet ﷺ himself says that Islam began strange, but al-Islam ghariban wa sayu'udu ghariban kama bada, and it's going to become strange again just like it began. So at that time, people were looking at the Prophet ﷺ weird because of what he was teaching. But sure enough, Allah Ta'ala established the truth. People came to the deen, and it was no longer strange. And it actually became admirable to be religious. Now we're at a time again where being religious and being righteous is once again being mocked. If you really think that you're going to wait for some God to save you, then the joke's on you, but rather the joke's on them. And that's something that we always have to remember, that this is not something new. So we take solace in learning the stories of the prophets. And that's why Allah Ta'ala mentions in the Quran that these stories of prophets are mentioned so that your heart can find consolation to the Prophet. Because the Prophet himself used to be quite, it used to weigh heavy on him. It used to be very difficult for him, and he used to feel overwhelmed and bothered that his people weren't listening, and that they would make fun of him. His own family would denounce him, and they would ridicule him. So Allah Ta'ala would talk about the prophets of the past who actually had to go through the same things. And then there's consolation when you hear stories of others who are experiencing the same thing as you. And that's why even in support groups, if you went through some type of trauma, they try to put you in groups with other people that can relate to what you went through, so that it could be a way of therapy and a way of helping you. So the Prophet ﷺ would hear these stories, and then it would also ease his heart. And we're also supposed to hear these stories so that when we do our best to stay on our deen, and people maybe mock us a little bit, or they look at us sideways, that we remember that this isn't something new. This is something we shouldn't feel bad about, and we shouldn't be discouraged from staying on our deen because of that. And this was mentioned much in this night of Tarāwīh about Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam. And then even his own family and his people wouldn't listen. And his dua that he recites. So the dua when you ride a boat, we learn it from Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam. The dua when you ride a boat, and it's the one place in the recitation of Hafs and Asim where you actually make the imala. Bismillahi majareha wa mursaha. Inna Rabbi la ghafuru rahim. And this is the dua that you say when you ride a boat. And it's pretty fascinating when you understand that this is actually the dua of the Prophet Noah when he rode on Noah's Ark, when he rode on his ship, right? So that in the name of Allah, while it sails and while it rides and while it sails. So indeed, my Lord is forgiving and merciful. This is the dua we say when we ride on a ship. Indeed, my Lord is forgiving, because you seek forgiveness because now you might die, right? So sailing the ocean blue, this was not something that you have to have a lot of courage to do that. I don't know what drove the people to say, you know what, let's get on this boat, which wasn't like, who knows how good the boat was. And we're going to go and just see where it takes us, not knowing where it would go. People used to think you would fall off the edge of the water because they thought the world was flat, right? So, and then when the people who did go in the ocean, when there's a storm, that's why Allah Ta'ala talks about this in the Quran, about people like when they face death and they're in the ocean, they say, "Oh Allah, save us." And if you save us, we'll be different. Allah saves them, and they go back to their ways. But in Inna Rabbi laghafuru rahim, that my Lord is forgiving. You seek forgiveness because you're about to do something where you might die, and then you say, "And He's merciful, so that maybe He'll let me live." So this is the dua that we're also supposed to try to recite when we ride on a ship. So nowadays, this is like the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. They say that sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is like Safinatun Nuh. The sunnah of our Prophet ﷺ is like Noah's Ark. It's the ship of Nuh alayhi salam. Whoever gets on will be saved, and whoever refuses will drown. Right? So people are looking at the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, they mock it. Why should I have to still follow the sunnah of this person from 1400 years ago? It's archaic, it's outdated, it's old-fashioned. We need to modernize. You need to get with the times. All these things are being said, and they mock it. They mock the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, just like they used to mock the ship of Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam. But whoever boards that ship was saved, and whoever didn't, drowned. And it's the same thing with the sunnah of our Prophet ﷺ. Whoever then holds fast to his sunnah, they will be saved. And whoever doesn't, they will drown in the dunya. They'll drown in the trials of the world. May Allah Ta'ala allow us to be of the people who board the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, who hold firm to it, so that it's a source of our salvation through Allah's mercy, not from the people who reject it, and it becomes a source of their drowning in the world. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Jazakumullah khair.